Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our monthly animal shelter fundraising series. Today we have part one of Show Me the Money, Fundraising Fundamentals. In just a few moments, we are going to get started as soon as more people are able to hop on the call. We have Trish Tolbert, the development strategist with our National Shelter Outreach team with us today from Best Friends. Whenever we start the presentation, we are going to have a couple of prompts for you to potentially jump into our questions box. And of course, we want to know any questions that come up while we're doing the presentation. So if you look at your GoToWebinar panel, you'll see there's a questions section. Please feel free to just type one in there whenever you have one pop up, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end of the webinar. But now that it looks like we have a steady amount of people and no one's jumping in, I'm going to pass it on over to Trish.
Thanks so much, Rhea, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. We know this hour is precious, and I hope those on the East Coast have lunch and those further west have that morning cup of whatever makes it work for you. I am actually joining the webinar from a rural part of North Carolina, just west of Chapel Hill, waiting for my community cats to show up as they always do about this time of day. And if you know anything about Chapel Hill, you know that we are famous for having produced crackerjack, stellar pro and college basketball players. And even if you know nothing about basketball, you know the name Michael Jordan. What you might not know is that Michael Jordan was not a superstar when he first came to Chapel Hill. And it took a coaching tradition of focusing on the fundamentals of that game, as well as a number of other things, to really produce the superstars that we've had. And this has been much on my mind in the last 7 months. I just joined the shelter outreach team about 7 months ago. It's a new team for Best Friends, been around about a year. We visited several dozen, not only municipal shelters, but 501c3s, combinations. And as we visited with people and we've learned from them, and hopefully they've learned some things from us, we've realized that people are really wrestling with fundraising. Sometimes they've been successful, but don't know exactly why. So they don't know how to replicate that. Sometimes they've tried things they've seen others do, but that hasn't been successful for them. And we all get caught up in our tactics, you know, our direct mail, our email, our social media, our face-to-face. Do we do corporate? Should we write a better grant? All these tactics are important. But back to the basketball tradition we have here in Chapel Hill, the fundamentals are really what put us on the right road and keep us there, even as we experiment with all the tactics. So we are one of your resources. And before we talk about some of the fundamentals, I just want to make a point of saying your regional specialist for Best Friends is out there as a resource for you. We're going to give you some resources. And when Rhea does the follow-up, you'll have some links to go to. But you'll also be able, using the link that's at the bottom of this slide, your regional specialist, to go to a place on Best Friends' website and find out who your regional specialist is. So I just want to point that out to you as we go forward. One of the things I always say about the fundamentals of fundraising is we have to answer the question, why should anyone care? That might seem like a no-brainer because we know why we care. We're working with animals, saving lives every single day. But we can't assume that other people do. So we have to answer that question. Why should a potential donor care? And we also have to answer, have we earned the right to ask? So I take it seriously when I say, why care? And I feel like we also have to explain to our colleagues who aren't as involved in fundraising, why should they care about fundraising? I'm sure most people on this call have met folks who say, well, fundraising is a necessary evil, or at best, it's nice to have, but it's not essential. And we're going to take a different stance on that today. We're going to basically say, why care? No money, no mission. Fundraising is a core program. And by core, I mean, what are those programs that we cannot afford to do without? I think certainly all of us would say there are many of our animal care programs we can't afford to do without. And maybe if you're working with a municipality, that municipality through your annual budget covers the essential needs. But based on the people I've met who are working in this field, Nobody wants to do transactional life-saving. Nobody wants to do incremental life-saving. We are in it to win it. We want to do transformational life-saving, and that kind of life-saving requires big money, and that's going to mean fundraising. So our agenda today is to just really peel back that onion beyond tactics to a couple of key questions. Who's got the money? What are the essential fundraising sources in this country? And then how do we achieve fundraising readiness? 5 things that I think all of us can work on when we start, and that it behooves us to kind of roll back every few years and say, how strong are our fundamentals? Are we still working on that to bring those fundamentals up to speed and have an A game every single year? And then just preview of coming attractions. Next month, we'll be talking about the fundraising process, a process that has to happen across all tactics, no matter what you're using to reach out to people. One foundation or cornerstone that I just want to lay down, again, thinking more about your conversations with other stakeholders, with supervisors perhaps, or with board members if you are a 501c3 and have a board. I think everybody knows that these days nonprofits are scrutinized as much or more than for-profit corporations. It wasn't that way when I began fundraising, but it certainly is that way now. And if you don't have at least a verbal common understanding, and even better yet, a written document stating your commitment to ethics and to transparency, because that's the other layer. It's one thing to have ethical behavior, but to be as transparent as possible is yet another layer of care for donors that says a lot to any potential funder that you might associate with. If you don't know how to start thinking about that, here are links to 2 places with professional fundraisers where you can go. The Association of Fundraising Professionals has an actual donor bill of rights you can take a look at, adapt to your own purposes. And then CASE, which is the Professional Fundraising Association for people in higher education, also has some principles of practice that you can take a look at. Let's take a look for just a minute at some time-tested truths about fundraising. I would love it if everybody on this call said, oh, Trish, we know that, move on. But again, just a few things that maybe will help you in conversations with others that don't have your level of understanding about that. We touched on the first one already. The second one, fundraising is both an art and a science. And by that, I mean there are things like science we can quantify, we can test, we can experiment with. We can do that with direct mail and email and social media, and we can segment our database of donors and come up with different things to try and test. And maybe this year we do one kind of letter and next year we do something else. All of that has elements of science, and you need those skills and those people that love to do that kind of testing, people that love process, and people that can do that kind of follow-up. But you also need artists in your fundraising team. When you start to work with people one-on-one, whether that's people of significant wealth, individuals, or representatives of corporations or foundations, conversation becomes an art. It's the art of discovery, finding out what they're interested in, sometimes the art of negotiation, and certainly the art of care, of providing ongoing care, which in fundraising we often call stewardship. My third bullet, I always love this one because I think it helps us really think about where we need to focus. If you ever have worked with a realtor to buy or sell your house, you know that one of the cardinal rules of realty is that the 3 most important things are location, 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 meaning location is it. Well, the counterpart in fundraising is relationships. So that's the 3 most important things, whether you're building those relationships through social media or you're building them face-to-face, working on crafting a relationship between your organization and that donor or potential donor is the most important thing that you can be doing. I've already given a little preview of big money giving to big dreams, but that's something for people to continually think about because so many of us start kind of just out of pocket. I know the first rescue of a puppy that I did, I paid for everything out of my pocket, and I could do that. But over time, if I had continued to find puppies on I-40 that needed rescuing and needed surgery, I would have had to look somewhere else besides my own income. So the bigger the dream, the more money you need. The good news is the more people you can invite to participate in something that's meaningful. And that leads to our final time-tested truth, which is fundraising is a team sport. No lone rangers in this business. It will take a village, it will take diverse skills, and it will become something that everyone needs to focus on. Not everybody needs to ask, not everybody needs to be an asker, but there's a role in the fundraising process for everybody, and you want to get very specific about what that role is and how each role works together, because you know the old cliche, when it's everybody's job, it's really nobody's job. And that's not really the situation that we want to create. We know money doesn't grow on trees, right? So where does it come from? Public funding, private funding. Those are the two kinds of funding that we have here in the United States. Public funding, meaning coming from government. Private funding, meaning non-governmental. But here's the thing sometimes people miss. For that private funding, there are really three sources. And they are these: individuals, corporations, and foundations. Actually, public funding is pretty much those sources too, because even though we have, when we get government grants, we have accountability to whatever that government entity is, still that money is coming from taxes and fees. And who's paying the taxes? Who's paying the fees? Individuals, corporations, and foundations. So that may not be a surprise to you. Foundations are often where we start when we're working in animal care. Sometimes corporations, if we know someone who has a business who's interested in our work. We call foundations and corporations together institutional givers. So if you're not familiar with that term, that's what it means. And these guys are fairly easy to see, right? We can Google them. We see the businesses in our community. They've got guidelines. They've figured out processes. Usually they kind of walk us through, here's what we want from you if we're going to consider you for any type of gift. Of course, one thing that's really different now is that most corporate money is tied to marketing. That's changed over the last 20 years. There was a time when corporations had much bigger philanthropic pots from which to give. These days, because of their responsibility to stakeholders, usually it's tied to marketing. Now, that may not be true if you're in a community where most of the corporations, and I'd put air quotes around that if you could see me, are actually businesses run by families. In many cases, when you're dealing with businesses in smaller communities, you're really dealing with the individuals behind those businesses. And that's important when you start to figure out how to work with them on a longer term basis. Couple of links for you. If again, you're just starting out in fundraising and you haven't already explored these folks. If you don't know about Maddie's Fund, PetSmart, Petco, or Rachel Ray Save Them All grants, which is a program of best friends, please take a look at these links. Start with just one. If your time's extremely limited, follow the advice of my writer friend, Will, who always says, if you don't know where to start, take 15 minutes. Anybody can do anything for 15 minutes. So just start with one and work your way through. We have a ton of resources for you. The link here, Best Friends Foundation resources. Our foundation partnerships team has put together one of the best packages I've seen in terms of helping you figure out how to identify foundations that may be interested in your work, how to be grant ready, what you need to have ready within your own organization in order to do a good job, all the way through to how to care for and build on that foundation relationship. So great resources there if that's where you're actually starting. One big takeaway I would love for everyone to go home and think about a little bit after this webinar is the nature of individual giving. So I hope by now, we have a little bit of lag in our screen, so I hope by now you can see to the right this report from Giving USA. We still, with all of our flaws, we live in one of the most charitable nations on earth, over $410 billion given in 2017. That's probably not a surprise to you. But if you take a look at those percentages, I'm still surprised by the number of people who come to me and want to talk about foundation grants or corporations. and are completely missing out on the fact that 70% of our charitable dollars in the U.S. come from individuals, and that another 9% come through bequests. So almost 80% of what is given in this country comes from individuals. So my two big takeaways on that: individuals rule. When it comes to charitable giving, individuals rule and bequests count. And if you don't have an individual giving program that you're putting your energies into, make that a goal for 2019, to put your toes in the water and get started. If you've already got that program and it's reached a kind of rudimentary level and you want to take it to the next step, then we've got some thoughts on some things that could help you that I'll mention a little later in this presentation. Just a couple of reasons to give, to work with individuals. Because of that, giving at every level, they don't have the ceilings that a lot of foundations and corporations have because of their stakeholders, and they can be cultivated in groups, individually, and beyond their lifetime. We've all read the stories in various magazines of someone who may have had a fairly low-paying job but loved the institution they worked for, or loved their church, or loved a civic group, and managed to save up enough to give a large 5- or 6-figure bequest. That kind of gift can come from anyone at any level of income, and those kinds of gifts can literally transform a program or an organization overnight. So those of you that are already working in individual giving, anybody want to chat in your thoughts on why individuals give? Like, what's the main reason research shows individuals give? Anybody want to take a shot at that? Ray is going to take a look and tell us if we have any thoughts to share.
All right. A person that came in and says, because they were asked.
Oh, I like this person already. Any other thoughts? Okay. That's good. If you have another one, you can throw it. That's so good. I think this person actually has like looked ahead at my slides because it's getting into the next one. I love it. Well, and so let me take a little twist on that, because the asking is so important. Research actually shows that people give because they want to make a difference. And I know that you will see all kinds of programs where you think, oh, well, it's the tax deduction. There's so much talk about the tax deduction, especially when it changes. So much talk about recognition, what's on the walls. Ooh, how do we build something that recognizes people if we have a facility? If we don't have a facility, that's our challenge. How do we create giving clubs with the kinds of benefits that public TV and radio get? I hear all this kind of conversation, but in the end, individuals have said again and again in surveys that have been done by very reputable think tanks, I want to make a difference. So the better the opportunity we give people to make a difference, and the better we show them, not just tell them, but show them the difference they've made, the more effective we're going to be at building out relationships with individuals. And back to that wonderful person, I wish I could send you a prize right now, who said because they were asked. The number one reason that people don't give is because they were not asked. Can you believe that? It's hard to believe, isn't it? But again and again, it shows up in the research. People were not asked. And just about the time that I think again, oh, that can't be right, I was sitting with someone just a week and a half ago, and she said to me, oh, well, such and such is not going to happen this year because we were hoping Mr. X would give the money to maintain that program, and he didn't. And I said, well, what happened when you guys asked him? And she's very quiet for a moment. And then she said, well, we didn't ask him. We just hoped. And hope is a wonderful thing, but it will not substitute for asking. So if you have stakeholders in your leadership group, people that are involved, and they think the money will just come without someone asking, you can tell them, not going to happen. It's a very rare occasion. We can ask by mail, we can ask digitally, we can ask face-to-face or through a grant, but we've got to ask. I want to mention high net worth individuals for just a moment, because we get lots of questions about how do I start a major gift program, or rather, at least, how do I get major gifts? And I always say, if you haven't built out your individual giving and you're not building relationships, then it's going to be much harder to build relationships with people of significant capacity. You know who some of those are in your community. They're the people who are already recognized as philanthropists. But one thing you can begin to do is pay attention to who's building businesses. There was a time when most major gifts were given by people with inherited wealth. Nowadays, earned wealth is what really drives the philanthropic bus. There's still people giving from inherited wealth, no doubt. But when you look out in your community, you often find those millionaires next door. If you remember that little book written a number of years ago, people involved in the restaurant chain, the dry cleaner chain, somebody with a refrigerated trucking business. Yes, I'm naming things from my hometown in Memphis because I actually know those details. People who are in businesses that really produce a product or service folks need, but folks don't think about it. It's not necessarily the first thought or the sexy thought. So when you start to think about where are my high net worth individuals, and then start to look around at what are the shared values they have with us. Do they have pets? Have they been involved in any type of organization? Not just animal care or welfare, but wherever animals are involved. I'm starting to see a fair amount of crossover between conservation donors, zoological donors, and animal care and welfare donors. And these folks, I find that never fails to surprise you what folks will be interested in. So just be prepared for that. So just a little bit of review. How do I get the money? Identify your best sources. Know that those three sources are everywhere. In your community, the strength may be in individuals or it may be in foundations. Start with what you have where you are. That's an old Teddy Roosevelt saying. I think it's a lot of common sense. But then build strength and diversification over time. You don't have to have corporate foundation and individual programs all running at once. Start and build that muscle strength and go from there. So I want to pause for just a second before we move on to those 5 fundamental elements and see if we have any questions that we can answer today. And if we have some that we can't answer today but can follow up on, happy to do that. Any questions about those 3 sources of funding?
We haven't had any questions come in yet. We can give it
All right.
more seconds, but I think at the moment we can probably proceed.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about the 5 fundamental ingredients. And this is true whether you're a 3-person rescue or you are a multi-layered municipal organization. The things that you can work on, and I always tell folks it's easy to remember these if you break them down. First, we're going to look in the mirror at ourselves. We're going to look at our vision. Then we're going to look at our leadership. Then we're going to look out the window at our markets and our marketing, because until we understand our markets, there's no point in putting marketing out there. We're just pushing messages into the black hole unless we're really targeting those to a specific audience or market. Then we're going to drill into those markets. Once we really understand them, we're going to drill in and we're going to find prospects, specific prospects with names that we're going to start looking at as potential donors. And once we have even some rudimentary element of these 4, we can start to roll them into an action plan. And your action plan might be a multi-page document, or it might be something on the back of a napkin that you draw up on the way home or while you're transporting. But either way, we need to have a plan to go forward. I'll give you just a minute to read the Steve Jobs quote here. And I'll say that passion is not in short supply in animal care and welfare. I have met some of the most passionate people I have ever met in my entire life, and honored to be among them. Those that are most successful at fundraising have added to the word passion the word informed, and put in front of that, informed passion. And what does that mean? Here's a great example. Knowing the difference between having a mission and having a vision. and the importance of being able to not only have that vision, but to have it be shared by the leadership of the organization and to be able to communicate it in such a way that it ties into everything else that we do. So the easy way to think about vision is mission answers the question, why do we exist? And you can see that in the examples here from our friends in Tucson, Pima County. That answers why do we exist. But vision answers the question, what will be different in the world when we succeed? Vision is that big dream. It's that what if. I always say that there's a reason that when Dr. King gave his famous speech, he said, I have a dream, not I have a plan. Because dreams and vision do things that plans don't necessarily do. Do we have to have a plan? Yes, of course we do. And he did, and we will. But first, we need to inspire and energize people. We've got to get them united. And the great thing about a vision is that it becomes a filter for our decision making. I see a lot of nonprofits who allow their programs and services to kind of take the place of vision. And when a potential donor comes along and says, what are you trying to achieve? They say, oh, well, we're running this program and we're running this program. This. Unfortunately, what happens is sooner or later you reach a fork in the road where you've got to decide about resources. There'll be an opportunity that you need to take or not take, and you'll have to make some decisions. And that one simple question, does this fulfill our vision? Or if you're having to look at competing programs, which of these does a better job of fulfilling our vision? That can really save a lot of time and anguish on the part of everybody. You do need a strategic plan if you're going to excite and energize donors from any of those three sources we talked about. And again, your strategic plan can be a multi-page document. I don't know that I've ever seen a strategic plan fit on the back of a napkin, but I have seen them on the back of one page of paper, just in terms of outlining how are we going to get there, what our audiences and programs and services are. You always want those price tags. Sometimes people launch programs without ever really thinking about those price tags, and that you do need to have that price tag on there so that you can build that out as a fundraising goal. And it also builds confidence among major donors. Just recently, we were at a shelter in North Carolina, and the shelter director said she'd already been approached by a person of high capacity, and the person said simply, come see me when you know what you want to do. There was a huge message in there. The door was wide open, but there was a caveat, when you know what you want to do. I just want to give a shout out to our friends in Lynchburg. These guys had a vision a number of years ago of being not just a great shelter, but being a community resource, of really changing the way their community thought about itself, thought about their role in the community. And if you get a chance to ever visit these guys, it's not just about their brand new building, which is gorgeous, or about the fact that when you walk into that building, you see rooms, living rooms, kitchen, animals living together as opposed to separated in cages. It's that, but what you feel is that this is a place I would come to do cat yoga. This is a place I would bring my family on Friday night when the food trucks show up. This is a real humming, buzzing center of the community. And that vision and that vision's execution took a lot of work. But if you have a little time and want to look into that further, have a look at their website or grab me at our national conference if you come, and I'll introduce you to some of these folks because they're a great example. There are many others, but just one that I had the time. You also want to look in the mirror at your leadership. It's the second of our 5 fundamentals. And here I'm not just talking about who's the founder or who's on the executive committee or on the board. I'm talking about fundraising leadership. There's got to be one or more persons who are thinking about the fundraising audiences, the strategies, who, if you have an ED or board chair, is helping aim and pull the trigger on sending that person to the right types of potential donors, producing talking points, or preparing that person to go out and ask for bigger money. There's got to be someone who's thinking ahead, who's looking at the crossover between how much you need to raise, want to raise, and what the market realities are. Having lived through several periods where we went into a recession and in some cases a war at the same time, I can tell you that the market reality doesn't always support what you need to raise at the time you need to raise it. And there has to be someone, again, looking out the window as well as in the mirror to help keep folks moving ahead, raising what you can, but also knowing that there's a reality out there that affects all of us. You're also looking out the window at your marketing. I love these puppies because, of course, when you first look at them, they kind of all look alike, but you know each one of these animals is an individual. And in the same way that we look out our window at groups of people in our community, they're all individuals. We can't relate to everybody one-on-one, but we can start to learn either demographically or psychologically where different clusters of people are and where the shared values with the kind of work that we do might be located. Once we get that sense, who cares, who might care if they knew more about what we were doing, then we can start to drill down into where do these people go? What do they read? How do they get their information? What do they like to do on the weekends or Friday night? We can start to understand the world they live in. And if you remember a book that Stephen Covey wrote a few years back, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of his rules that are guidelines that he talks about is seek first to understand, then to be understood. So we do, and I'm as guilty as any fundraiser out there of talking about how do we tell our story? How do we tell our story more effectively? And truthfully, the first thing we need to do is listen. We need to listen to what other people are interested in. We need to understand their stories and then find the crossover between their story, our story, and the story we want to build together for the animals whose lives we're attempting to save. And then we become exponentially better fundraisers along the way. When we look out the window at those markets and now we start to think about prospects, this is the only little bit of jargon I'm going to throw out there. There's a difference between suspects and prospects. Suspects are just anybody in your community, right? Anybody you think might care. They become true prospects for your work when you can verify 3 things. First, that they have capacity to give. And secondly, that you have access to them or can get access to them. And finally, that they have interest in your work. And sometimes that simply means finding someone who can open the door, who will help you get an appointment, who might go with you to the appointment, but at least open the door to the appointment, and going in and talking to them and sitting down and asking. I do see some folks spend a lot of time running around kind of behind the scenes and trying to find out, is this person really interested in our type of work? And sometimes the best discovery is just seeing if you can get the appointment and going in and sitting down and talking to people. Not leading with what we do and our work, but leading with respectful questions about what they're interested in, where they're taking their life and their philanthropy, and then finding that crossover and moving on from there. Couple of things, and this is a little bit of the back house stuff, but it is necessary just so you don't get caught off guard down the road. You will need a few things to manage prospects. We can start out using, as one person told me recently, I got a legal pad with donor names on it. You can start there. That's where you need to go. But at some point, you will need some type of software, even if it's Excel, just to start and be able to sort prospects so that you can start to reach out to them in an organized and strategic fashion. Most folks, sooner or later, are going to want to invest in some donor software. That always produces a lot of angst because we're all worried about, we want to get the right thing, but we don't want to spend too much money. So my good news for the day is that in May, we're going to have best friends Mila Burns, who is our guru about all sorts of donor software, is going to do a webinar about how to choose. And she will be mentioning a number of programs on there. She doesn't recommend any particular program, but she's got some wonderful charts where she's put advantages, disadvantages that allow you to compare those with what your needs are and make a more well-informed decision. So back again to that informed passion. That's an example of that. You're going to need somebody in the group to take responsibility for managing each group of people that you have in your potential prospect base. And where you've got individuals of high net worth or corporations and foundations, folks to manage that relationship And the best manager for the relationship is not always the person that knows them best. So if that's kind of where you are in your organization, you may want to make sure if you're coming to our conference to pick up some of the sessions on major gifts, because those will be really helpful to you. And we'll be doing a webinar on major gifts and major gift conversations and that type of thing this fall. You'll need a process for looking at the relationships regularly, and you'll need some type of basic research. Google helps us find so much these days. Also, LinkedIn and Facebook. If all you've got is 10 minutes to try to get basics on someone, you can start with those things. If you don't even have that amount of time, then again, I say the best thing can be to go in with some respectful questions and ask people what they're interested in, what they're trying to accomplish with their life and their philanthropy. So the last fundamental here, looking at all four of those things, they'll all be different based on your vision, leadership, markets, and prospects, and then answering 2 questions. And those 2 questions will help you develop an action plan that you can move forward on, certainly for the remainder of this year, and then perhaps going into your next fiscal year or next calendar year, however you organize your work. We have a couple of tools that will help you, I think, based on whether you feel you're a planner and a process person, or whether the thought of planning and process makes you want to run for the hills. So the first one is an online workbook that our annual giving team has put together that will help you do some of the critical thinking. And it really helps you work through what kinds of materials you should gather to put together an annual plan, and then what questions you should ask yourself to do that. And we actually are going to have the same team that created this workbook. We'll be doing a pre-conference workshop at our national conference. If you're coming to the conference, I really hope you'll think about just taking an extra day and coming to that workshop. If you're wanting to build out an annual plan, you couldn't give yourself a better gift than doing that. If you're not a planner and you say, oh, please don't put me through a workbook, just give me some ideas, I need a narrative, story would be even better, then I'd suggest that you follow this link to our fundraising appendix in our Humane Control manual, where you'll read the story of Karen Hollish, who was the first DOD for Pima County, Animal Care and Control. And Karen talks a lot about starting with the low-hanging fruit. For instance, they felt they had no donors, but then they started to look around at their list of fosters and adopters and began to think about those folks as potential donors. They knew not all of them would give, but began to think about, what do we have? Back to that Teddy Roosevelt advice, start with what you have where you are, and then begin to think about how to build on that. And of course, lastly, we all get so engaged in our own world, we forget to share. But I would just invite anyone on this call who feels like, hey, we just did the whole vision thing. I think we came up with a great one. I'm happy to share ours. Or here's how we got started with our marketing. And I should also mention that we just did a marketing as a foundation for fundraising webinar last month. And Rhea's going to get that up on our website at some point in the near future. And you'll be able to go there and listen to Michelle Safi of Best Friends and Melissa Nicely of our partner organization in Charlotte, North Carolina, talk about how their marketing work has been a basis for fundraising. And I think that can be helpful as well. But sharing with each other is so helpful. So just to summarize, we all want donors to show us the money. To make that happen, we need to be looking in the right places, meaning at the right sources, and we need to earn the right to ask. So identify your best sources and strengthen those 5 fundamentals. And we'll have a nice flow of revenue, just like my little friend Boo Bear here has locked on to. He's a kitten in our kitten nursery in LA, and he was probably the smartest I've ever seen at identifying his best sources of nourishment and moving forward. And if you're the kind of person who says, oh, just give me 1 or 2 things, 1 or 2 small things that are practical that I can do to get started on this, here are 7 that I would put out there. You can pick 1 or more if any of those work for you, or if you have a creative bent and you want to do a riff off any of these that get you started, please do and share with us your upgrade to that. Our webinar for next month is going to talk about fundraising as a process, regardless of what tactic we're using. By tactic, again, I mean whether it's email, direct mail, social media, face-to-face, grant proposal, whatever it may be. In order to be successful over time, this process needs to be occurring within all of those tactics. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about how some of the best folks out there who are doing this in Best Friends work through that. We're also going to be bringing this process into our pre-conference workshop. That'll happen at the end of July in Dallas. So if the process itself is something that you feel like you want to work on in your organization, know that that'll be there to benefit you as well. And I hope you'll join us for that. And if you have others that didn't make it to this particular webinar, this, of course, is being recorded. It'll be available. They can look at that before they join us for part 2. So that's the end of the info we're putting out there for your reflection, and I hope upgrades and sharing. I'll stop and say questions, thoughts, ideas.
All right. Thank you so much, Trish. That was amazing. And we do have some questions for us. The first ad came from Sherry, and this one actually popped in earlier when you had that first question break. It came in right after you continued. And she asked, you talked about failing to ask. Is there a time not to ask?
Oh gosh, what a good question. Yeah, there is a time not to ask, and it's related to what is going on in that person's life. So let me split it and say, for groups of individuals, there are some times that are better to ask than others, right? We all know end of year. I've never been sure that end of our own fiscal year was a great way to ask, but there is a giving season in spring, just like there is end of year. But I think the research still shows that this November, December period is when most people give. Giving Tuesday has really been bigger than I ever thought it would. That depends on the community, but we were just doing some work with Carrie at Harris County in Texas, and Texas cities have really gone great guns over Giving Tuesday. So that's another one that's been big. Summer, I think for, again, groups, not the greatest time to ask. People are on vacation, but kids are out of school, probably that's the least effective. But with individuals, I think the biggest thing is knowing what's going on in that person's life, and particularly if it's an economic. I've been through a fair amount of economic downturn or family crises with individual donors over the years. And if you're in touch with them and you know something is going on or you discover it is, just offering that great donor care and being able to have an honest conversation with them about whether it's a good time or not. And you can always open that conversation with, I know how much you care about X. I would not want you to miss an opportunity to be part of this, but I'm also aware of ABC. So I want to be guided by you, Mary. Tell me whether this is a good time or not for us to talk about that. That'd be my thought on that.
Great. Thank you, Trish. And then just a couple of people have asked in general about the links that Trish shared. Yes, those will be emailed to you. Please keep an eye on your inbox tomorrow. We'll be sending out a follow-up email so you'll be able to access those. And they're also available in general on our network.bestfriends.org resources section as well. But please let us know if you don't receive that follow-up email by tomorrow. And then from Natalie, we have one for you, Trish, that says, could you please give us a few pointers now how the free to low cost fundraising and donor stewardship ideas?
Okay, let me make sure I understood that.
Yeah.
Some tips on free to no cost donor stewardship.
Free to low cost fundraising ideas and donor stewardship.
Okay, but if we're talking about stewardship, which is essentially donor care, right? Many of those activities are the same that we think about for donor cultivation. Cultivation being, what are you doing to increase your, strengthen and deepen your relationship, right? So, and let me just also say that we did a webinar. We got a lot of background noise somewhere. I just want to make sure folks can hear.
Hey, Trish.
Yeah.
I actually, it was an acronym and I messed this up. So my apologies, Ellie. She meant software, not stewardship. My brain was in that.
Oh.
So software, that was on me. Sorry about that, Natalie. Thank you for the quick adjustment there.
So, all right. Okay. Well, just to finish off that thought, in case somebody's out there going, well, I really want to know about stewardship. We had a webinar in January on stewardship by our fabulous Kelly Morton, and that'll be up for people too. So I'll finish that thought and then say, you know, the lowest cost thing that people probably already have is Excel, and you can get started just with contact information on that. It isn't going to let you do as much creatively with relationship development. And I never really like to talk a lot about software because there again, it's so different from person to person. I'll just say I do know that a number of small to mid-sized groups and shelters use Little Green Light, and I have heard good things about that. There again, caveat, anything beyond Excel, and I would say anybody on this call who has, if you want to make recommendations, that's fine. The more advanced ones like Donor Perfect and Salesforce, where you've got many more, I won't say bells and whistles because that doesn't make them sound substantial, and there are substantial advances to that. All of those are things that you can put off a little while, but Mila's info will help a lot. And in fact, if you want to send Rhea, if she's got your email address, I think I have an old chart of Mila's that I could share with you that might give you a sense of some of those without having to wait for the May webinar if you'd like. And I'd rather you see those pros and cons than have me offer suggestions when I don't know what you all's needs really are.
All right. Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah, we had one other come in, and it says there have been quite a few posts in some of the forums we have and about acknowledging donors, but what is appropriate and expected for gifts, in-person events? You know, is it appropriate to ask for additional funding from them at those particular events?
Okay. We've had quite a few posts about acknowledgments. Is it appropriate to ask for gifts at a, give me the last part of that.
Yeah, it's like, you know, what is appropriate and expected for gifts at in-person events? Like, is it appropriate to ask for additional funding, you know, I guess while you're at like a donor event?
Oh, okay. It depends on the event is my answer to that. And, you know, this is where getting really specific internally about, is this event a fundraising event, meaning we're going to try to raise as much money as possible from all the things we're going to do at this event, or is this a cultivation event? Because what can be way more effective than trying to produce a massive event with ticket sales and ad books and banners and all of that kind of thing, is looking at small sort of parlor events where you have anywhere from 10 to 20 people, maybe even less than that. If it's high capacity, you're giving them an insider opportunity, someone important in the field that you're working with, or maybe just your CEO is going to be talking a little bit about what you do. You've done a little bit of plowing the field. You know there's interest there. Now people are hearing from someone on your board, maybe your CEO, and the idea, and experienced philanthropists know this, is that then you'll be following up with them face to face to talk about how they might be interested in getting involved. So, you know, I think sometimes people do themselves a disservice by creating big events, putting a lot of energy into the event itself, and then either there's just kind of a broadcast, now you know we all need money for XYZ program, as opposed to individual follow-up. I think the most effective things come when you put the energy into who's going to come to this event of particular capacity within the target audience and our prospects. What are we going to do while we're there? Yes, but then how are we going to follow up with them afterwards? So unless this is kind of a fundraising event that's considered a gala and you really are trying to raise, you're trying to build that over multiple years, you have an audience for that. We have communities in North Carolina where a gala style event will work, say in Winston-Salem, for instance, where Forsyth Humane does do the kind of black tie event where they can build an audience that comes year over year over year, and you're not having to recreate the wheel every single year. There are other communities in North Carolina where there's just not the capacity for that, or where people are not that interested in coming to that kind of big event. And a lot of the events that I see people do are really more friend raisers than fundraisers, which can actually be more effective if you do great face-to-face follow-up afterwards. You'll learn a lot more about your prospects, and you'll do a better job of building relationships with them. So that's my general answer. And if that didn't hit the mark, let Rhea know, and I'll figure out a way to talk one-on-one and see if we can do a better job. Fair enough?
I think that sounds good to me. And I'm happy to do that. So I don't feel like we have any other new questions at the moment. I've said that before, though, and someone has sneaked in on us. But if you do have any last-minute ones, please feel free to put them in now. Otherwise, we are always available. You can shoot us emails. You can pop into our Facebook group and ask our whole community. We love hearing from you. And as Trish mentioned earlier, there will be a part 2 to her presentation, and that is happening on April 9th at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. And it'll be on, or set a part 2 of Show Me the Money. You can register for that one also from our website, network.bestfriends.org/events/upcoming. I know it's a mouthful, so we'll be sure to include that for you so it's easier for you to pop on and register. We still haven't had any new questions come in, Trish, so I think we will be saying goodbye, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it, everyone.
Thanks so much, everybody. Send us your ideas for upgrades if you have any. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for your time today.